Ladies and gentlemen, we want to recognize the presence of Mr. and Mrs. Alan Azode of Amaigbo, Chairman of Amaigbo. Please, a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Amaigbo Town Union, Chairman of Amaigbo Town Union, London, UK. Chief Mr. and Mrs. Allen.
Birthday girls and boys. Please, parents, can you join us and children? Sing. Boy and girl, where are they, please?
You are invited to dance on the floor now. The chairman has opened the kitchen, the chairman. Now left for you to have a dance. Ladies and gentlemen, dance. Thank you very much.
daddies, aunties, uncles, we are going to sing. Nannies, we are going to sing happy birthday. Are you ready to sing happy birthday for your friends?
Yes.
Are you ready? Okay, we're going to sing. Look at them. They are all at the cake table. We're going to take it one by one, yeah? We start with Victor, yeah? Okay. Happy birthday. Please, adults, please, we are going to sing with them. 1, 2, go. Happy birthday to you.
Victor.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Victor. Happy birthday to you. How old are you now? Victor.
I'm 6.
Clap for him, he's 6. Come on. You stand here. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday.
Victoria. Entertainer.
Are you now? How old are you now? How old are you? How old are you now? 5. Clap for her. Come on. Success. Success. And this one.
Where is success?
Come on, Daddy. Oh, we are singing happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to success. Happy birthday to you. Now sing for Precious too. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to us. Happy birthday to you. How old are you now? How old are you now? She's 3. She's 1. Hip, hip, hip. Hip, hip, hip. Hip, hip, hip.
Ladies and gentlemen, you are singing as if you haven't eaten the rice and the rice. What is the matter today? Please, please, please. We are not here for. Has somebody died here? Has somebody died here? Come on, we are here to enjoy ourselves. Look at the way the children are singing. What is the matter with all of us here? My man, please give them some drink. If they haven't had some oguro so that they can open their mouth louder. Now, for the final time, please, let us make it a lively one. Come on, let's sing happy birthday to them. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday. Open your mouth. Come on. Happy birthday, dear Victor. Happy birthday to you. One more. Happy birthday to you know, she ate a lot of food here today. Now, please, a round of applause for them. Thank you very much. Now, a very big music for them. Let us see them dance well. They are dancing like DJ. Give them that. Victor is going to cut the cake. Please, let's count 1 to 3. And Victor is going to cut the cake. I think Victor is playing for Arsenal. Is that Arsenal? Okay, he's playing for Nigeria Green Eagles. Now, 1, 2, 3 for Victor. 1, 2, 3. Round of applause for Victor, please. Clap for him. Wonderful. Now let's go to Victoria. Victoria, ready? Oh, she plays for Spice Girls. Is that Spice Girls? Okay, Spice Girls. 1, Victoria. 2, 2.5, 3. Please, a round of applause for Victoria. Oh, Teletubby is the last one. Oh, difficult Teletubbies. Okay. Teletubby.
Lala.
Success. Success. Come on, you don't have to be shy now.
Success.
Okay, this is for success. Hold it. 1 for success. 2 for success. 2.5 for success. 3 for success. A round of applause for success now. Music for them. Thank you very much.
I'm the hottest round. Y'all can stop me now. Listen to me now. I'm lasting 20 rounds. And if you want me, then come on get me now. Since you with me now, let's make it biggie bounce. Switch my style. People sing around. People gather round. Now people jump around. Get your freak on. Get your freak on. Get your freak on. Get your freak on. People you know, me and Tim were living 20 years ago. Now what the dealio? You feel about me? Let me know. Got the feeling, son. Let me throw you some. That's what we when I'm done. We got the radio shit like we got it done. Hush your mouth. Spit it out. In your face. Open your mouth. Give you a taste. Ain't no stopping me. Copywritten, so don't copy me. Y'all do it slowly. And y'all can't come close to me. Get your freak on. Get your freak on. Get your freak on.
Face the cameraman. We are here till tomorrow morning. The party has not started. When you did. The party continues. We are here till tomorrow morning. Are we set?
still ran.
The rumours grew in strength and the press became more persistent. For Diana, it was a foretaste of things to come.
Is there any possibility of any announcement of your marriage in the near future? Can you tell me? Can you tell me if there's any possibility?
I'm not going to say anything, I'm afraid.
Right, but Prince Charles did give us a hint himself. He said we wouldn't have to wait too long.
And they didn't. The engagement between Prince Charles and Lady Diana Spencer was announced in February 1981, and the bride-to-be faced her first formal photo call.
The first photograph you've actually had with us together.
She was the most beautiful girl I'd ever photographed, and she just glowed. And when she smiled, lit up the picture. You knew you had a wonderful picture. And when she looked down your lens and those eyes always made up properly, always beautiful. They were just sensational pictures. You just couldn't afford to miss anything she did.
Good. Into this lane, please. More. There. More, honey.
What do you think we've got in common?
Sense of humour. Every outdoor activity, except I don't ride.
So remember did that.
Lots of things, really.
What about you, sir? No, I think certainly, I mean, all sorts of things. Certainly a sort of love of the outdoors, and she's a very energetic character as well, which is very encouraging. And music and interests like that, and skiing.
Can you find the words to sum up how you feel today, both of you?
Difficult to find the right sort of word, isn't it, really? Just delighted and happy. And I'm amazed that she's been brave enough to take me on.
And I suppose in love.
Of course.
Whatever in love means.
Well, it
you
obviously
can put your own
means,
interpretation.
Obviously means two very happy people.
Yes.
Once again, congratulations.
Well, from us, congratulations.
Thank you very much.
It's very kind.
It was a very revealing moment, I think, the engagement interview, when they were asked, quite rightly, if they were in love. She said, of course, which is interesting looking back at her instinct of public relations, which we've seen since was already functioning then at a very young age. Charles, in his ponderous way, said, whatever love is. That now seems very significant because I don't think he ever was in love with her. I think he entered into this marriage in an entirely cynical frame of mind. We now know that he had this mistress, Mrs. Parker Bowles, who he'd already had an affair with, continued during the marriage. When Prince Charles started to take an interest in her, I think she genuinely did fall in love with him, as what 17-year-old wouldn't if the 30-year-old future King of England threw himself at your feet. I think any girl would have fallen in love with the idea of Charles, the idea of his future, the idea of their future together, whatever he himself was actually like. And there were many aspects of him that were very appealing. He promised her a happy family life.
As far as the public was concerned, it was a match made in heaven. And on the 29th of July 1981, the stage was set for the wedding of the century at St. Paul's Cathedral in London.
Prince Charles, before the wedding, could have been involved with 3 separate women. Amanda Knatchbull, the granddaughter of Earl Mountbatten, Anna Wallis, the daughter of a Scottish landowner, and the Princess of Wales, Lady Diana Spencer. And each one of those could have been a royal bride. And he, in his public pronouncements, said that he wasn't looking for somebody to be in love with, but he was looking for a companion, a friend who would and really be able to help him in a very difficult job.
It was a fairy story because the whole thing up to the wedding, you know, that she was so innocent, so young, and kind of, you know, not used to all this glitz and glamour and stuff, and then suddenly, you know, she was going to marry this good-looking prince, and It was just fantastic. I mean, I get goosebumps just thinking about it. It was the most incredible time for all of us.
Diana's Emmanuel designed dress brought gasps of admiration. It symbolized everything about a royal match that had captivated the world.
It's just like designing for any other bride, except that you had to keep in the back of your mind the fact that there's, I don't know how many billions of people were going to be watching. And, you know, they could see the nerves and everything, and it was those imperfections that showed that she is a human being, that she was living a fairy story.
Diana was the first English woman to marry an heir to the throne for over 300 years. She was just 19 years old, an English rose, and the royal family rejoiced.
I, Diana Francis,
I, Diana Francis,
take thee, Charles Philip Arthur George,
take thee, Philip Charles Arthur George,
to my wedded husband,
to my wedded husband,
to have and to hold,
to have and to hold,
from this day forward,
this day forward,
according to God's holy law,
according to God's holy law,
and thereto I give thee my troth.
and thereto I give thee my troth.
Here is the stuff of which fairy tales are made. The prince and princess on their wedding day.
Across the globe, 1,000 million people tuned into the royal wedding. In the course of the day, the shy nursery school assistant was catapulted to the status of international superstar. The newlyweds began their honeymoon in Gibraltar before cruising the Mediterranean on the royal yacht Britannia. But all was not well. Diana suffered a recurrence of bulimia, the eating disorder.
Bulimia is something she'd had in her teens before she got married, but the consensus, I think, is that it's one of those things that if the person is happy and fulfilled, then it goes away. And it's always got the potential to come back if that person's life goes wrong for any reason. It was after Diana had, for instance, on their honeymoon, discovered photographs of Camilla fluttering out of Charles's diary, Charles wearing cufflinks that Camilla had given him in the early weeks of their marriage. What kind of a start is that to a marriage? And it's not surprising that the bulimia quite swiftly came back.
In reality, the royal couple were emotionally and intellectually incompatible. There was a 12-year age gap, and their interests differed widely. But on their return from the honeymoon, Diana gave no hint of her waning romantic illusions.
Madam, how are you enjoying married life?
Highly recommend.
How do you like Balmoral as a place?
I think Diana, in many ways, was probably quite a difficult girl to be married to. But let's not forget, A, that she was very young, B, that she got no help at all in this extraordinary change of life.
On the surface, at least, the early days of Diana's marriage appeared happy and contented. The royal couple's first official tour was to the Principality of Wales. Shy Di was an instant hit. She had an easy and open manner, and the crowds loved it. The young princess made her first faltering attempt at speech-making, which she always found difficult.
I am extremely grateful to you, Lord Mayor, and to the City Council, and to the City of Cardiff, for granting me the freedom of the city. I realise it is a very great honour, and I am most grateful. I would like to try to express my thanks to you in Welsh also. Mae'n blesor cael dod I Gymru. Hoffwn ddod eto yn fuan. Diolch yn fawr.
But Diana was struggling to come to terms with the restrictions of court life. Haunted by the rapidly unraveling relationship with her husband, the picture postcard princess felt isolated and increasingly desperate. The birth of Prince William in June 1982, 11 months after the royal wedding, set the seal on what seemed a fairy tale marriage.
May we see your son, Your Royal Highness?
Will's arrival was a cause for celebration throughout the land. In reality, Diana suffered badly from pre- and postnatal depression and continuing bouts of bulimia that reduced her to a deeply disturbed state. She later confessed to attempts at self-mutilation. Nevertheless, the birth of a second in line to the throne gave both parents great joy and brought a new focus to Diana's life. She was determined that her young son would know the close love and attention she'd been starved of in her own childhood. In 1983, Diana accompanied her husband on their first overseas tour to Australia. But in a break with royal protocol, she insisted that baby came too. It was a populist stance that instantly endeared the young princess to an adoring Australian public.
Now for all of our students on here today, good morning, girls and boys.
They were bowled over by her openness and informality.
Does Prince William have a favourite toy?
Jamie, he loves his koala bear he's got. But he hasn't got anything particular. He just likes something with a bit of noise. He got a plastic whale that throws things out the top, little balls.
The newlyweds were perfectly in step and enchanted everyone around them. The royal match appeared flawless.
That was a real love trip every day, and they just used to hold hands, and he was very tactile, and he would always be touching her and making sure she was comfortable, and I remember he would reassure her, and he would hold her hand and smile at her and say, "You're doing a great job, darling," and that was the most wonderful, wonderful trip.
The rapturous reception was repeated a few weeks later in British Columbia, Canada. Everybody wanted to embrace the beautiful princess, and Di Mania was born.
It's just so beautiful. I'm just so privileged. I can't believe I did that.
Ironically, it was her overwhelming popularity that placed a further strain on her relations with Charles.
I've come to the conclusion that really it would have been far easier to have had two wives. To have covered both sides of the street. And I could have walked down the middle, directing the operation.
He became jealous that she was more popular than him. If they arrived somewhere together and they went to separate sides of the crowd, the side that he went to would groan. Now, that would be difficult for any of us to handle, but he didn't handle that very well, and that, within the marriage, gave her a little bit more power, a little bit more self-confidence.
That growing self-confidence showed in every aspect of her life. The shy young girl who first stepped onto the public stage and into the glare of international publicity had little fashion sense. That changed rapidly.
She did look like a county girl. You could tell that she was sort of, trying to work out what the style was. She knew that there was a style. I think she had an idea that she wanted this glamorous image, which is what she was very good at and is what she portrayed.
She did look like a nursery school teacher. All the photographs of her in the billowing skirts and sort of slightly transparent, and very innocent, and that's what she was like. And you know, when she came into us, she was very much like that, and she was looking for a dress for her first big occasion out with Prince Charles, and I think it was at the Guildhall. And she saw a black dress hanging there, and she decided to wear that. And from that day on, I mean, she was a fashion icon.
Hello. Hello, good morning, ma'am.
Come in. The sketches were marvellous. Shall we just put... Have you got lots of material in there?
Yeah. She'd say, look, I'm going on this tour and I'll need to be covered up, and, you know, she'd tell us the restrictions that were imposed by the different cultures and things. And then we'd just get on with it, and we knew the colours that she liked and the looks by then. So we would just come up with, like, tons of drawings.
It's a difficult one, because I've got to hide my elbows, 3/4 length in hem, and a sort of cruel round neck.
So we would lay them all out on the floor, and she'd be down there on the floor with us, sorting through it all. And it was great, real collaboration.
So, I think we might avoid the spots.
Yeah, okay.
No spots.
I think she was aware of the importance of being seen, because people come along, they want to see the princess, and they, you know, they expected her to stand out in a crowd. And so we use a lot of emerald greens and pinks, all those kind of colours, and they look great on her. She's got the right skin colour and hair, and she looked great.
I quite like what you've done there.
Just like a sort of...
You're a top knot? Like a band. Yes, I'd love to wear that.
Really?
Could I do it with my mop?
Yes.
We could tempt it.
Well, that's easy. Well, we can do that.
Diana became intrigued by the world of high fashion and was a swift learner. She was rapidly developing her own sense of style. With her own natural good looks, she began to fulfill the fantasy role of princess as no other British royal had done before her.
She's very, very soon got out of that sort of little girl thing of the early 80s around the marriage. And, you know, give her 5 years, given her 4 years, 5 years, she was looking like a sort of a Hollywood actress.
But the fashion-conscious Di was equally vigorous in undertaking enormous amounts of charity work. It became one of the central pillars of her life.
Will my hubby be down from Scotland then? Because I quite like to go with him.
Yes.
Will he be down, or will it be on my
I don't
own?
think he will. I think he'll still be. He'll still
No.
be
Still
up in Scotland. Yes.
I think it's all right to go on my own, something like this, because it's quite a
think
big occasion.
It's a big occasion, but it is for your charity.
Is it going to be for birth?
No, Help the Aged. Help the Aged. You attended.
As if to fill the emotional void in her marriage, she played an increasingly important part in attracting publicity and money for uncomfortable causes such as leprosy, the homeless and the aged.
Working for Help the Aged as our patron, she did more to raise the profile of older people, both in the tragic circumstances, frailty and vulnerability, as well as in the joyous circumstances. She could celebrate older people's lives and loved to hear their stories.
We're always kneeling on things like this. I've never
Yes, I'm just backing them. I didn't
What do you
actually.
actually stuff it with? What do you put
Well,
inside?
there's sort of. Show you this one. Oh, when he made a bag of notes, it was soft. Yes.
It's not a lot of tights going in there.
No. People would come up to me beforehand and they'd say, oh, we've only got a couple of minutes to meet her. I really don't think that's enough, and, you know, I think perhaps we ought to be meeting her for longer. And I always used to say, you know, it's absolutely fine, because I knew what they didn't know, which was that at the end of the time they'd met her, they'd come back to me and say, she spoke to me for hours.
And were you in a motorbike accident?
I was in a driving accident. Died into water while I was too shallow.
So how long do they work you in here for in the morning? Long enough, I suppose.
Long enough, yeah.
Were you able to sleep in the afternoon?
She had that ability to make people feel included and to make other people the centre of attention. And actually that's a special gift. And not many people have it, and she had it in enormous abundance.
Fault of their own, obviously, so we're parents to them as well.
You're building extensions on your
we are.
All these people.
We just as a happy family, you know. Yeah. I mean, I was one of 9, so we was used to sharing. Yeah, we was used to sharing, you know.
As a member of the British royal family, Princess Diana's daily duties encompassed almost every conceivable situation. Despite the many problems she faced in her personal life, she tackled each official engagement with grace and aplomb. Wherever she went, she seemed to light up the lives of those around her.
Who's that?
I thought you might ask that one.
Who's that? Who does she belong to? Yours.
She would bring, even to the most formal occasions, a sense of informality and fun. Everyone who met her spoke of that magic touch and her ability to affect the lives of ordinary people.
And then onto the parade ground. That takes about a minute.
How many times do you practice this?
I think that's very good.
I think that's all right.
Yes, I think it's absolutely good.
You can't really say much else, can you? It's lovely, thank you very much. I'm proud.
By 1984, Diana was pregnant again. The royal couple enjoyed the happiest period of their married life. A short while later, on September the 15th, at St. Mary's Hospital in London, Prince Harry was born. But what should have been a joyous occasion for both Charles and Diana quickly turned sour.
After Prince Harry was born, she said to her friends, he looked at Harry, he expected to have a girl, he wanted a girl, and he said, oh, it's a boy, and it's got red hair. Red hair is a Spencer characteristic. So she says herself that something inside died on that day, on the day that Harry was born, and from that moment onwards, her staff, her friends, and all those around her could feel the chill surrounding Charles and Diana.
Diana was concerned that the sorry state of her marriage should not affect the lives of her sons. Memories of her own unhappy childhood reinforced her determination to become the best mother in the world. With typical tenacity, she made the young princes the center of her life.
Mine, can I lead him, please?
Will you promise to walk slowly?
That's much better. Nice and slowly. That's better for Harry. Good boy.
Her life was her son's. They meant really everything to her, and she had a very close relationship with them both. She really has guided them through so much and prepared William certainly for the role ahead of him. And I think he will miss her more than words can possibly say. She wanted them to be in touch. That for her was the most important thing, not to be isolated. I think the monarchy has been very isolated, and she lent it a very human side with all the work that she did. And she was always keen to impress on Prince William and Prince Harry how important that was to stay in touch. I think that would be the single message that both of them will remember from her, that and her extraordinary compassion for other people.
The royal couple were living a lie. Their marriage was on the rocks, but the royal roadshow had to go on. Once more, Australia.
We're off.
The marriage of the century of which dreams are made had become a tyranny of togetherness.
Good luck.
Thanks, I'm gonna need it.
And closer to the fence now, the length and a half, then Feeder and Under Rosen there, followed by Black Knight. 300 to go, our boyfriend under the whip, a length and a half in front of Butternut and Coiro, Corrie May.
Only the closest insiders could have detected the fragile state of Diana and Charles's marriage. But for the royal couple, it was not all fun at the races. Overseas tours were long and arduous and made more difficult by a strained relationship and schedules that didn't always go according to plan.
Change your birthday.
Well, there's a problem with the runway. It's hardly usual.
Not possible.
What do you mean later?
No, they
Later
tell
what?
us.
That we may have to drive to Miami and take off from there. So
Which is a mere 5 hours drive,
No,
wasn't it?
it's not.
Six.
45 minutes. About 45 minutes.
So that we'll get back to Brighton by midnight.
I think it might just tip us over to midnight.
That's all right, because it's 6 o'clock our time, isn't it? Body time.
Oh, that's
It's
a
all
good
right.
way of looking at it.
Still be drinks time for you.
I'm working on that.
Right.
So no press now, just official photographers for this recording.
Hello, my little top.
10 to 8, 10 to 8. Yes.
Their first visit to the United States followed, where a curious press corps mustered in force to report on a presidential welcome for the royal couple. For Diana, it was a widening of her horizons, a portent of things to come. In later years, it was America that responded most enthusiastically to the charismatic English princess with the film star looks.
She's so thin, it's disgusting. She's beautiful. She's great. She's beautiful. She's great.
Back in England, Diana extended her patronage to an ever-widening circle of groups and causes. She passionately wanted to do good and possessed an instinct for human relations, the true touch of a princess, which was unequalled.
Because the gala was wonderful. Adored that.
You enjoyed it, didn't you?
I had a cold, much to Harold's horror. Every time there was a quiet moment, it was going on. I loved it.
You didn't look it. It doesn't show in your eyes when you have it.
Well,
I
that's
mean,
just good
yeah.
makeup.
No, but some people's eyes go dull.
You must have felt rotten though, having to sit through it all.
No, it's all right now. I just get embarrassed. And you know when you're not supposed to cough, you cough more.
Yes, of course, you can't control it.
And the bachelor's dress, of
The
course.
bachelor's dress. Yes. Didn't think I had the pearls down the back that night.
No, you
didn't. I learnt that. It was very uncomfortable when I wore that.
When you
stabbed in the back.
Swing the person there.
Although Charles and Diana now only came together on official occasions, they still maintained the facade of a rock-solid marriage. This was the young Prince Harry's first day at school. Divorce seemed out of the question, as it would mean the destruction of everything the royal family stood for. Meanwhile, they both looked elsewhere for the affection and support that they had failed to give each other. For Charles, it meant a return to Camilla Parker Bowles, the love of his life.
I think there were a few years while the children were being born when he kept her at a distance, but the friendship remained, and the friendship always had the capacity to become sexual again, which I think it did long before the marriage had irretrievably broken down. The marriage broke down because of his relationship with Mrs. Parker Bowles. And if Diana had 2 or 3 lovers after the irretrievable breakdown of the marriage, so what? Psychologically, I think men and women will understand that Diana, the world's most famous, the world's most attractive woman, deserved to fall into 1 or 2 subsequent arms to have the happy family life she's always wanted and always been denied.
In February 1992, evidence of the strange in their marriage became public when Diana spurned Charles's attempt to kiss her at the end of a polo match. A 6-day official tour of India became a tale of 2 tours, with Charles and Diana going their separate ways.
Prince Charles went to the Taj Mahal some 10 years before the visit towards the end of the marriage. It is one of the world's most romantic places. When they did go to India together, he didn't take her. He chose to stay behind in Delhi.
A wiser prince than I would have opted for a visit to the Taj Mahal and the Red Fort at Agra, which I believe is where some, at least, of the greatest pundits of the press think I ought to be anyway.
She famously now posed for a photograph alone, therefore looking very solitary, and it became the main one of what we'll call a series of postcards home, another one at the pyramids in Egypt, where she was sending clever signals to the world that she was very alone in this marriage.
It was this bombshell book that finally blew the lid off the royal marriage. In June 1992, Andrew Morton's Diana, Her True Story was published with the princess's tacit consent. It claimed that she was trapped in a loveless marriage and was desperately unhappy. Despite the book's claims that Charles was a distant father, uncaring husband, and adulterer, the couple embarked on a disastrous state visit to Korea a few months after publication. Diana denied any involvement with the book, and no statements were forthcoming from Buckingham Palace.
In the absence of any official statements or other information or interviews, body language becomes immensely important. And it was the body language of that trip, the Korea trip, that showed that this marriage had broken down. And Diana's antennae, I think, were much more alert to this body language. Again, you can call it media manipulation if you want to, but awareness of the media, than Charles, who just gritted his teeth and got through it.
Diana returned from the Korean fiasco alone, and speculation was rife. The British public, who'd expected so much of Charles and Diana in 1981, were left confused and perplexed. A further bombshell awaited them.
It is announced from Buckingham Palace that, with regret, the Prince and Princess of Wales have decided to separate. Their Royal Highnesses have no plans to divorce, and their constitutional positions are unaffected. This decision has been reached amicably, and they will both continue to participate fully in the upbringing of their children, while continuing to give a wholehearted commitment to their public duties.
Your patron has never been happier to see you. Whatever uncertainties the last few weeks may have brought, I want you to be certain of this: our work together will continue unchanged, especially now as Christmas brings its own painful stresses to so many people in need. The sick, the old, the handicapped and the homeless, the lonely, the confused, and the simply unloved, who are needing your help more than ever.
A new era opened in Diana's life. She now threw herself, body and soul, into charity work, using her personal magnetism to draw support for some of the most difficult causes.
When you look through Diana's life, you see that she's always been slightly rebellious. Her work for AIDS was very much against the royal rules. I mean, they tend to stick to very traditional charities. And the very fact that she was prepared to cuddle AIDS victims, shake their hands without gloves, helped to break down much of the mythology surrounding AIDS. And in that respect, I think she did an enormous amount, not just in Britain, but around the world, to help to break down those taboos.
She had the common touch. It's no secret that we used to go to a hospice and people would stay alive knowing she was going to come, and they wanted to see her so much they would carry on living because this woman just had the touch. She would sit on the beds of the patients and hold their hands. I remember in Brazil once, you know, she cuddled these AIDS babies when AIDS was a real dirty word, you know, but Diana almost single-handedly took the stigma out of AIDS.
HIV does not make people dangerous to know, so you can shake their hands and give them a hug. Heaven knows they need it.
She had a complicated personality. Who doesn't? But just this, you know, this underlying enormous compassion and capacity to give and to respond to people who are suffering on exactly their level. She understood about suffering. She'd suffered so much herself that she was able to, it was really a language, an emotional language that she understood.
She became aware not just of her ability to be the fairy on the Christmas tree, but to be a woman who could bring attention to subjects that were neglected. And not only subjects that were neglected, but subjects in which she herself got a real buzz out of being involved. She started with the glitz and then went to the things that were far less glamorous, which gave her more satisfaction.
I think we ought to retire gracefully.
Armed with nothing more potent than a smile and a kindly word, she reached out to others with her personal gospel of giving and caring.
When she had returned from various engagements, often she would cry. She was completely depleted by what she had done. And I think very often what the public saw was this extraordinary woman going about her job. And I think very often they thought it was easy, but it was not easy for her. It absolutely